The Groth war beast was halfway through devouring a live plasma eel when the human dog sneezed. The sound was pitiful, high-pitched, and so utterly mundane that it cut through the grand chamber of the Galactic Council like a joke in a funeral. The enormous assembly of alien dignitaries went silent for a beat, their tentacles and horns twitching, then erupted into a storm of laughter. Thunderous, screeching, guttural laughter that echoed across the domed chamber, bouncing off polished stone and steel. The Vorkan general who sat at the head of the military bench actually fell sideways from his seat, gasping for air between roars. They were not laughing at the sneeze alone. They were laughing at humanity. They were laughing at the ridiculous creatures humans insisted on bringing to these gatherings, creatures that could not spit acid or rip hulls with their claws, creatures that looked like toys compared to the galactic arsenal of war beasts. Ambassador Tom felt the heat crawl up his neck as the snickers rose higher. His dog, a golden retriever named Daisy, wagged her tail happily and licked her nose, oblivious to the humiliation. Tom forced a diplomatic smile, but it was clear the laughter had bitten deep. A seven-limbed ambassador from Trevec slapped its claws against the table, cackling that humans kept prey animals as companions. A gelatinous delegate oozed its way toward Daisy, mocking that Earth creatures were nothing more than emotional pacifiers. They were pets, not partners. The message was clear: humanity was a species of sentimental weaklings, surrounded by warriors who cultivated only strength and terror. Tom clenched his jaw. He wanted to argue that loyalty, companionship, and affection had strength of their own, but the words stuck in his throat. No one in that hall would listen. They had their war beasts bred for conquest. Earth had dogs that sneezed inappropriately. When the laughter subsided, the council moved on to other matters, but the damage had been done. Tom's dignity, and the dignity of Earth, was in tatters. Later, in the quiet corners of the ambassador's quarters, Tom vented his frustration to his assistant. "They think we are fools," he muttered, pacing. "They think compassion is weakness. They think our animals are jokes." His assistant, a weary zoologist who had been dragged unwillingly into diplomatic service, raised an eyebrow. "That is because they have never met the right animal," she said cryptically. When Tom demanded an explanation, she leaned back with a sigh and told him of a creature on Earth that feared nothing. A creature immune to venom, indifferent to pain, relentless in battle, and notorious for attacking animals many times its size. It was not big. It was not beautiful. It was, however, insane enough to stare death in the face and bite its nose off. The honey badger. Tom laughed at first, until he saw the glint of seriousness in her eyes. She pulled up footage from old Earth documentaries. Grainy recordings of a squat, muscular creature tearing into venomous snakes, clawing open beehives, fighting lions twice its weight, and surviving the impossible. He watched one clip 3 times, unable to comprehend how the little beast simply shook off a cobra bite that would kill most animals within minutes. The honey badger passed out, woke up hours later, and continued eating the snake. Tom leaned forward in silence. This was not loyalty. This was not affection. This was something else entirely. This was a middle finger to the very laws of nature. In that moment, a seed of an idea began to bloom in Tom's mind. If the Galactic Council wanted proof that Earth's creatures were not weak, perhaps it was time to show them the one animal that had never learned the meaning of fear. Perhaps it was time to wipe the smirks off their alien faces with something too terrifying and ridiculous to dismiss. He imagined the great chamber filled with sneering aliens, and at the center, a honey badger tearing into their prized predators like a berserk buzzsaw. The image made him chuckle bitterly, then laugh outright. Still, doubt crept in. He thought of Daisy wagging her tail that morning, eyes filled with unshakable love. Humans had brought dogs and cats and other companions into the stars because they symbolized the best parts of Earth. Could he really replace that symbol with a snarling, chaos-soaked badger? The laughter of the council replayed in his head, sharper this time. His pride burned hotter than his doubt. Maybe love had its place, but so did fear. That night Tom drafted a request to return to Earth on urgent business. He framed it in the most diplomatic terms, citing research opportunities, ecological preservation, cultural demonstration. The council approved without question, likely convinced that humans were retreating back to their cozy menageries. Tom knew otherwise. He was coming back with proof. Proof that Earth did not only breed loyalty and affection. Proof that even the smallest beast on their planet could make the galaxy's deadliest predators hesitate. As the transport ship hummed through hyperspace, Tom stared out into the star-streaked void and whispered to himself. They think compassion makes us weak. They think our animals are toys. Wait until they meet the one that does not give a damn about compassion, or weakness, or death itself. He felt a grin spread across his face, the kind of grin that promised trouble. For the first time since the sneezing disaster, Tom felt hope. Not gentle hope, not friendly hope. Dangerous hope. Back in the galactic core, the rumors of the dog incident spread quickly, exaggerated with each retelling. By the time the story reached the outer colonies, humans were described as bringing lap dogs to duels and kittens to battlefield councils. The humiliation multiplied. Tom did not care anymore. Let them laugh. Let them howl. Soon enough, they would not be laughing. Soon enough, they would understand that Earth's creatures were not decorations. Soon enough, they would meet the honey badger. And when that moment came, Tom promised himself, the galaxy would never laugh at humanity again. The return to Earth was less triumphant and more like sneaking back after a defeat. Tom stepped off the shuttle carrying a storm in his chest. He had been humiliated before the most powerful creatures in the galaxy, and now he stood in the gray light of an Earth morning, his mission clear but absurd. He needed to find the most dangerous creature that no one respected, the one animal that cared for nothing, not even its own survival. The honey badger. His first stop was the Zoological Institute, where his former assistant, Dr. Ramos, reluctantly met him with tired eyes and folded arms. She had been the one to mention the badger in passing, never intending it to become a diplomatic strategy, but Tom had latched onto the idea with desperate conviction. You want to bring one of those maniacs into space? Ramos asked, her voice flat. Do you have any idea what you're asking for? You can't train them. You can't reason with them. They destroy everything they touch. I've seen one chew through a concrete wall just to steal a snack. Tom simply leaned forward across the desk, his voice low. Exactly. That's what I need. Something that makes every alien in that chamber think twice. Ramos rubbed her temples, muttering about career suicide and the ethics committee, but eventually she led Tom to the research enclosures. They passed by glass pens holding wolves, hawks, and venomous reptiles, until they stopped at what looked like a small, reinforced cage made of steel mesh and welded bars. Inside, sprawled lazily on its back with its legs in the air, was a creature the size of a loaf of bread with coarse gray fur and a white stripe down its back. It blinked once at them, then promptly rolled over and attacked the lock on the door with teeth and claws. Sparks flew as it worried at the metal, utterly indifferent to the humans watching. Ramos gestured wearily. Meet your diplomat. We call him Noodles. Don't ask why. Tom stepped closer, studying the animal. Noodles was scarred across the muzzle, one ear half chewed, and his claws long and wicked. When Tom crouched, the badger paused, narrowed its dark eyes, then lunged at the bars with startling speed. Tom jumped back, nearly falling, as Noodles hissed and snapped at the air. Ramos sighed. This is your plan? Bring a ball of spite and teeth to the council? You realize he might kill something on sight. Tom straightened, his smile sharp. That's the idea. Getting Noodles out of the institute was a disaster from the first minute. The moment the cage was wheeled down the hall, the honey badger began slamming against the sides, rattling bolts loose and shrieking like a demon. By the time they reached the shuttle, the staff had armed themselves with poles and thick gloves, trying to keep the animal contained. Tom stood nearby, ignoring the chaos, a strange pride stirring in his chest as Noodles ripped through a reinforced food dish and hurled the scraps across the hangar. The alien council had mocked humanity for loyalty and softness. Let them laugh at this. The first training attempt was held in a remote field outside the city, far from people and property. Tom, dressed in padded armor that made him look like a walking mattress, stood at one end while Ramos reluctantly opened the cage. Noodles shot out like a cannonball, ignored Tom entirely, and tore straight into the supply crate, scattering rations across the grass. When Tom cautiously approached, the badger turned on him with a snarl, lunged, and clamped down on his boot with jaws like iron. Tom shouted, kicking, but Noodles only chewed harder until leather and metal peeled apart like fruit skin. Ramos doubled over laughing, then yelled at Tom to freeze. Noodles, having shredded the boot to his satisfaction, wandered off to dig a random hole, leaving Tom limping and furious. The second attempt involved drones. Ramos suggested testing the creature's response to moving targets. They released small, buzzing spheres programmed to hover and dart. Noodles looked up once, tracked them with narrowed eyes, and then launched himself skyward in a frenzy. He caught one in his claws, tore it apart mid-air, and went for the next. Within minutes, all 5 drones lay in pieces scattered across the ground. The badger stood panting on a pile of sparking debris, foam dripping from his jaws, his eyes daring anyone to challenge him. Tom clapped, unable to hide his grin. Ramos muttered that this was not training, this was unleashing a biological nightmare. Days passed in similar disasters. Noodles escaped from reinforced cages twice, broke into the laboratory refrigerator, and consumed half the supplies meant for the zoological team. He terrorized interns, shredded equipment, and once stole Ramos's sandwich directly from her hands. Tom followed his rampages with a mix of horror and exhilaration. No alien war beast would ever predict this. They were trained predators, conditioned killers. This was something different. This was chaos given claws. The final straw came when Tom, against Ramos's protests, brought Noodles aboard the shuttle for a containment test. The honey badger was supposed to remain in a steel-reinforced enclosure during launch. Instead, halfway through pre-flight checks, Noodles had somehow unlocked the hatch from inside and was found wedged in the cockpit chewing on wires. Sparks rained down as alarms screamed. Tom wrestled with the creature, earning 3 new scratches and losing another pair of boots before they managed to drag it back. The ship smelled like burning insulation, and Ramos threatened to resign on the spot. Tom, bleeding and grinning like a maniac, said only one thing: "He's perfect." That night, as he sat in his quarters nursing his wounds, Tom thought back to the laughter of the Galactic Council. He imagined the Vorkan general toppling from his chair, the oozing delegate sneering at Daisy, the sneers of predators who saw humans as weak. His hand throbbed from where Noodles had bitten him, and yet he felt no regret. Fear was a weapon, and this creature radiated it like heat from a furnace. The Council would never expect it. They thought they knew Earth animals. They had not yet met the one that cared for nothing. Ramos stormed into his quarters one evening, throwing down a datapad full of reports of damage, injuries, and chaos Noodles had caused. She demanded he abandon this madness before the creature killed someone. Tom listened quiet, then slid the datapad aside. "I am not trying to tame him," he said simply. "I am going to introduce him." Ramos stared, then slowly shook her head. "You're insane." Tom smiled. "No. I am human. And they are going to learn what that means." The decision was made. The Council had mocked Earth with laughter. Soon, Tom would return with a new answer. An answer with claws, with teeth, and with a fury no alien had ever witnessed. The honey badger would speak for humanity. The grand chamber of the Galactic Council was alive with noise and spectacle as species from across the stars paraded their beasts. Great cages rolled forward, force fields hummed, handlers strained under chains thicker than a human's torso. The Trev brought their psychic raptors, eyes glowing with violet fire, each one capable of sending soldiers into madness. The Yokrin released a pack of acid-scaled reptiles that hissed smoke as their saliva burned through the floor plating. The Groth delegation, as always, brought a single colossal war beast that shook the entire platform with each step, its armor-plated hide gleaming under the lights. The audience roared with applause, with pride, with the confidence of predators parading their power. At the very edge of the arena floor, Tom stood with a crate no larger than a travel trunk and tried to ignore the sweat dripping down his back. When his turn was announced, a hush swept over the chamber. Thousands of alien eyes turned his way, expecting another humiliation. The laughter from his last appearance still echoed in memory, and some delegates already choked back chuckles, nudging their neighbors as if waiting for a punchline. Tom stepped forward, cleared his throat, and pressed the control to lower his crate into the arena. Metal hissed, locks clicked, and the door swung open. Out waddled Noodles, fur rough, eyes gleaming, claws scraping metal. For a moment there was silence, then a ripple of incredulous laughter spread like wildfire. The chambers shook with it. The mighty council of warlords laughed themselves breathless at the sight of a squat, scruffy creature barely larger than a house cat. Tom stood firm, though the ridicule burned like acid. He said nothing. He simply folded his arms and waited. Noodles, ignoring everyone, sniffed the air, scratched himself, and began digging furiously at the polished floor, sending sparks flying. The laughter redoubled. The Vorkan general wiped tears from his eyes and jeered that Earth had truly lost its mind. But then a handler from the Skrull delegation released a venomous arachnid the size of a man, intending to mock Tom further. The spider skittered forward on 8 armored legs, mandibles clacking. Noodles froze, eyes narrowing. Without hesitation he lunged, faster than the eye could follow, clamping onto the arachnid's head and tearing. Venom sprayed in every direction. The alien handlers screamed. Within seconds the mighty predator lay twitching, half its head missing. Noodles stood atop the corpse, blood dripping from his jaws, utterly indifferent. The laughter died like a candle in a vacuum. Whispers rose, shock spreading across the chamber. Someone shouted that the spider's venom should have killed it instantly. Noodles sneezed, shook his head, and returned to digging at the floor, the corpse forgotten behind him. Tom hid his grin. That was only the beginning. The Trek handler, furious, unleashed one of the psychic raptors to restore dignity. The bird screeched, eyes blazing violet, waves of psychic assault rolling across the arena. Delegates clutched their heads in pain. Noodles looked up, blinked once, and then charged. The raptor shrieked, mind thrust intensifying, but the badger only barreled through, unfazed, as if the mental attack was nothing more than a breeze. He slammed into the bird's chest, claws tearing into feathers and flesh, biting deep into its throat. The raptor flailed, wings snapping, until it collapsed in a heap. Noodles stood panting atop his second victim, as calm as if he had just raided a garbage can. Chaos spread through the audience. Some shouted for the display to end, others demanded to see more. The Yulkran reptiles were next, unchained and hissing as they circled the small mammal. Acid dripped from their jaws, eating holes into the steel floor. Noodles spun, eyes wild, and pounced. He seized one by the throat, rolled onto his back, and shredded its belly with his claws. Acid splattered across his fur, smoking, but he ignored it completely. The other reptiles lunged, biting, clawing, but he twisted free, tore chunks from them, and limped forward with stubborn fury. In less than 5 minutes the floor was littered with twitching, acid-burned corpses, and Noodles stood among them, charred fur smoking, refusing to fall. The council was in uproar now, delegations shouting over each other. Some demanded the beast be destroyed. Others demanded to know how Earth had bred such monsters. Tom stood silently, letting the panic grow. He could feel the tide turning. The laughter was gone. In its place was fear. Then the Groth delegate roared, silencing the chamber. Their war beast, a towering brute plated in living armor, stomped forward, its steps making the ground quake. It opened its jaws in a bellow that rattled the walls, eyes fixed on the honey badger. Noodles turned slowly, blood and acid still dripping from his muzzle. The size difference was laughable, a mouse staring up at a mountain. The Groth beast charged. The chamber held its breath. The impact never came. At the last second Noodles darted aside, faster than seemed possible, and clamped onto the monster's plated leg. His claws found purchase in the gaps, tearing into flesh beneath. The Groth beast howled, slamming itself against the floor, trying to shake the attacker free. But Noodles climbed higher, biting and clawing, leaving a trail of gore. The massive predator stumbled, blood spraying, eyes wide with shock. Then, with a sound that no one in the chamber had ever heard, it whimpered. It actually whimpered, backing away from the tiny, furious creature latched onto its throat. The chamber exploded in pandemonium. Generals who had once laughed now shouted orders to retreat. Delegates who had mocked Earth pressed back into their seats in terror. The Groth beast collapsed onto its knees, shuddering, as Noodles finally released his grip and sauntered back to the center of the arena. He was filthy, burned, bleeding, but he stood unbowed, chest heaving, as if daring anyone else to try their luck. Tom let the silence hang, savoring it. Every sneer, every laugh, every insult hurled at humanity was now ashes in the mouths of the council. He did not need to say a word. The honey badger had spoken for him, and its language was chaos and defiance. As Noodles curled up on the cooling corpse of a reptile and began licking himself without a shred of dignity, the chamber dissolved into confusion. Some demanded immediate bans on human creatures. Others demanded alliances before Earth unleashed more of these nightmares. No one laughed. No one dared. Tom stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his heart pounding with triumph. The humiliation of Daisy's sneeze was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Humanity had just introduced the galaxy to fear in its purest, smallest form. And the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The news of the demonstration spread faster than any official communique. Within hours of the council session, shaky footage of the honey badger's rampage was smuggled out on private channels and blasted across galactic networks. Whole star systems watched in disbelief as the tiny gray beast tore through venomous monsters, shrugged off acid, and forced the Groth war titan to its knees. The recordings looped endlessly, dissected frame by analysts, biologists, and military strategists. Rumors metastasized at light speed. Some said Earth had engineered the creature as a biological weapon. Others whispered that the badger was a genetic throwback from a forgotten age of terrors. Still others believed the humans had only revealed the smallest sample of an entire army bred in secret. What no one could deny was that the galaxy had seen a predator that did not fear death and did not stop once unleashed. Tom, who had barely spoken during the chaos, found himself at the center of a storm. Delegates who once refused to acknowledge him now crowded his quarters with demands and bribes. They wanted to know how many of the badgers existed, how Earth controlled them, what it would take to secure a supply. He deflected every question with the same calm line, letting the mystery grow. He claimed only that honey badgers were a natural part of Earth's ecology, and that the council had witnessed only a single, ordinary specimen. The implication was obvious. If one could do this, what would 100 do? What about 1,000? And what kind of planet produced such things casually? On distant worlds, panic began to take root. Colonies near human territories raised their defenses, convinced a swarm of badgers might come tearing through space at any moment. Alien warlords who had once looked at Earth as a joke now considered it a rival too dangerous to provoke. Military leaders convened emergency meetings to study tactics against the new threat. None found satisfying answers. Weapons that could vaporize ships meant nothing to a beast that did not fear pain, and none could understand how to break something that never acknowledged defeat. Soldiers whispered in bunkrooms that humans carried living nightmares in their pockets. Meanwhile, Noodles basked in the chaos without awareness or care. Tom found him curled inside the ambassadorial quarters, surrounded by shredded cushions and the remains of a ration pack he had stolen. The badger had gouged claw marks into the walls and slept sprawled on his back, snoring loudly. Tom sat nearby, exhausted and exhilarated. The plan had worked, but the success was sharper and more dangerous than he had imagined. Instead of simply silencing the laughter, he had ignited a wildfire of fear. Fear was useful, but it was unstable, and already he could see how quickly it might burn out of control. The next council session was unlike any before. Instead of mockery, Tom walked into a chamber vibrating with tension. Delegates eyed him as though he carried a live explosive in his briefcase. The Vorkan general who had once laughed until tears streamed now spoke cautiously, suggesting that Earth's position in the council should be reconsidered. The gelatinous Trebek delegate, usually smug, pressed against the far wall of its containment sphere as if Tom might unleash another monster at any moment. Several species demanded guarantees that humans would not weaponize the honey badger against galactic law. Tom responded diplomatically, insisting that humanity was peaceful and had no intention of unleashing its animals on anyone. His words soothed few. The image of the Groth Titan retreating from a snarling lump of fury was burned into every mind. Outside the council chambers, matters grew more volatile. Media channels filled with debates about human intentions. Some portrayed Earth as a cradle of horrors, an untapped arsenal that might one day dominate the galaxy. Others painted humanity as reckless madmen who could not even control their own pets. Ordinary citizens whispered of badgers creeping into their homes, of invisible armies waiting in the dark. Tom heard rumors that entire black markets had sprung up overnight, selling fake Earth animals to terrified buyers who hoped to train them or study them for weaknesses. It would have been comical if not for the increasing calls among military factions to preemptively strike Earth before humanity unleashed what some now called the Scourge of Soul. Tom spent sleepless nights calculating his next moves. The victory had been too complete. He had given humanity fear, but fear was double-edged. A cornered galaxy might lash out, and Earth was still fragile compared to the empires that now trembled. He thought of Daisy, his loyal retriever, back home on Earth. The galaxy had laughed at her sneeze, yet he realized that compassion had never truly been weakness. It was strength of a different kind. Now, thanks to Noodles, humanity was painted as keepers of chaos. The question was whether they could survive the weight of that image. One evening, as he brooded over scattered reports, a coded message arrived from Earth. It came from the highest level of the United Earth Directorate, terse and full of alarm. The Council had sent private envoys, probing Earth's defenses, trying to confirm whether entire armies of honey badgers existed. Spies had been captured near reserves, biologists bribed, laboratories raided. The Directorate feared that paranoia might tip into outright invasion. They urged Tom to stabilize the situation before it spiraled beyond control. Tom felt the weight settle on his shoulders like iron. His gambit had worked too well. Meanwhile, Noodles remained unstoppable in his own small sphere of chaos. Attempts to keep him contained aboard the station ended in disaster. He chewed through reinforced bars, shredded floor plating, and once broke into the food storage to gorge himself until he passed out in a heap. Station personnel grew to fear the sight of him waddling down the halls, jaws dripping and eyes glinting. One engineer swore that the badger had managed to gnaw through a power conduit and survive the resulting electric arc without flinching. Tom stopped trying to explain. The legend only grew stronger when exaggerated accounts filtered back to the council floor. Soon whispers claimed that honey badgers could eat energy itself, that they laughed at plasma fire, that they bred in shadows faster than they could be killed. Galactic leaders grew increasingly desperate. Some pushed for treaties with humanity, eager to secure peace before these beasts were unleashed. Others pressed for alliances to crush Earth in its infancy. Both sides sent envoys to Tom, flooding his quarters with threats disguised as offers. He accepted neither. Instead, he carefully allowed the rumors to spread, understanding that so long as the galaxy remained unsure, Earth would remain untouchable. Yet in the back of his mind, he wondered how long the balance would last before paranoia exploded into war. The galactic capital trembled under a storm of rumors and half-whispered plans. What had begun as laughter at humanity had twisted into dread, and dread was far more dangerous. Tom saw it in every corridor he walked. Delegates who once ignored him now stared with narrowed eyes, muttering as he passed. Security patrols doubled, their weapons always a little too ready. The council's grand hall no longer rang with mocking laughter but with tense silences and quick arguments cut short when humans approached. The galaxy was bracing itself, and Tom knew it would not take much for fear to ignite into war. The first official sign came in the form of a motion presented by 3 allied species, demanding that Earth reveal the full scope of its fauna. They wanted biological registries, breeding reports, containment protocols, and above all, proof that honey badgers were not the tip of a hidden army. When Tom refused, citing sovereignty and ecological rights, the chamber erupted in shouts. Delegates accused humanity of hiding weapons of mass destruction. Others defended Earth, pointing out that nothing in galactic law prevented a species from demonstrating natural fauna. But the seeds had been planted. Fear was growing into paranoia, and paranoia had a way of making empires do reckless things. Tom's fears proved true days later when an assassination attempt struck at the heart of his embassy quarters. A group of mercenaries, faces hidden behind adaptive masks, infiltrated the compound. They cut through steel doors and bypassed security systems, their mission clear. They wanted Noodles. They believed that killing the creature would end the legend before it spread further. What they did not believe was that the honey badger would be waiting for them. By the time security forces arrived, the mercenaries were already screaming. The walls were shredded, claw marks tearing through reinforced alas. 2 assassins had fled in terror. One was found unconscious with bite wounds in his armor, and another had simply vanished, leaving only a blood trail that ended in the ducts. The only sign of Noodles was a smear of blood across his muzzle, and the mangled remains of a mask he had dragged into his den. Tom knew without doubt that the assassins had not been killed by human soldiers. They had been killed by something far smaller and far less merciful. The attempt backfired spectacularly. Word spread that even trained killers armed with plasma rifles could not contain a single badger. The whispers grew darker. Some claimed the mercenaries had not even managed to wound the creature, that their shots had simply bounced off its hide. Others swore that the honey badger had slipped through walls like a ghost and hunted them one by one. The truth was bad enough, but the myth was worse. Across the galaxy, soldiers began to joke nervously about what they would do if one of the things found its way into their barracks. No one laughed when the joke was told. Tom realized that fear had tipped too far. Now entire coalitions were preparing for preemptive strikes. Fleet movements were reported near human space, and alliances were forming with the single goal of preventing humanity from unleashing its beasts. Earth was still small compared to the massive empires of the galaxy. If war came, no amount of clever diplomacy could shield them. The only way forward was to turn fear into something else before it consumed everything. When the Council called an emergency summit, Tom saw his chance. The great chamber was ringed with war banners and guarded by soldiers armed to the teeth. Delegates hissed accusations before the meeting even began. Some shouted that Earth must surrender its genetic secrets. Others roared that Earth should be quarantined or destroyed. The Groth general bellowed that their war beast had been dishonored and demanded blood. Through it all, Tom stood at the podium, silent, waiting. And then, with a signal only he knew, the cage beside him opened. The entire chamber froze as Noodles ambled out. The badger was calm this time, belly round from stolen rations, fur still scarred from past battles. He sniffed the air and let out a low growl that echoed through the silence. Weapons clicked into readiness, and delegates flinched as the creature turned its black eyes toward them. Tom raised his hands. His voice was steady but carried the weight of every rumor, every whispered terror. He told them the truth. He told them that Earth had no armies of these creatures, no breeding programs, no secret stockpiles. He told them this was one animal, untrained, unbound, acting on instinct alone. And then he asked them a question. If one untrained beast could do this, what might happen if Earth chose to breed them? What might happen if humanity decided to turn its entire biosphere into weapons? The words sank like stones into deep water. Delegates shifted uneasily. Some whispered about alliances, others about treaties. For a moment, the possibility of war hung in the air like a blade. Then came the twist that Tom had not planned. Noodles vanished. 1 second he was sniffing at the floor, the next he was gone. Panic swept the chamber. Delegates shrieked, soldiers fired into the shadows, the Groth general roared for containment. Tom's heart froze. If Noodles attacked here, in this chamber, the galaxy would declare war before the day ended. He scanned desperately, his pulse hammering. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then came the sound of tearing metal. The Council's flagship, docked just beyond the chamber, shuddered as alarms blared. Tom bolted for the observation window and saw it himself. Noodles was in the ship. Somehow the creature had slipped through armored walls and was now rampaging through the reactor core. Sparks erupted as the beast clawed at conduits, tearing through uranium shielding like paper. Engineers scattered in terror. The chamber filled with horrified gasps as the warship, pride of the galactic fleet, groaned under the assault of one small mammal. Delegates shouted for evacuation. The Groth general fell silent, eyes wide with something Tom had never seen before in that species. Fear. The council session ended not with a vote but with chaos. Armadas prepared for action, but no one dared fire while the Badger was still inside their flagship. Rumors spread that Noodles could eat radiation, that he was drinking down the power of the core itself. By the time security teams managed to drag him out, still alive and still snarling, the legend had grown beyond control. The galaxy now believed Earth harbored beasts immune to energy, capable of infiltrating the strongest ships, unstoppable by any known weapon. Tom stood in the wreckage of the day, his mind reeling. He had wanted fear, but now he saw the galaxy teetering between terror and awe, both aimed squarely at humanity. He understood that the next move would decide everything. The war no one wanted had almost begun, and the only thing preventing it was the uneasy belief that Earth commanded the most dangerous creature the galaxy had ever seen. One Badger had turned the balance of power upside down, and now the fate of humanity balanced on its ragged claws. The flagship's reactor room still smelled of scorched metal and panic when the chamber reconvened. Delegates gathered in silence this time, their voices low, their eyes wide, the memory of the honey badger clawing through uranium housings still fresh in their minds. Tom sat at the center of it all, hands folded, his face calm even though his heart thudded like a drum. He knew the galaxy had crossed a line. No one would ever dismiss Earth again. But respect was not enough. He needed resolution. He needed an end that would keep humanity safe, not perched forever on the edge of war. Noodles was returned to his reinforced cage, though the term meant little after his recent display. Engineers had layered alloys, force fields, and locks around the container, but Tom knew it was a formality. The Badger lay curled inside, chewing lazily on a chunk of twisted reactor conduit he had carried out of the ship as a trophy. Guards refused to go near him, their armor clanking as they shifted nervously. It was absurd, Tom thought, that the greatest military assembly in the galaxy was held hostage by a creature no larger than a small dog. Absurd, and yet entirely true. The council began in halting tones. The Groth general, once the loudest voice of derision, spoke first. His booming voice lacked its usual arrogance. He admitted that his war beast had never encountered such defiance, that no weapon of his people had ever faced an enemy who simply ignored pain and venom. Other delegates followed, grudgingly confessing that their species had underestimated humanity. They still feared the implications, still suspected Earth of hiding legions of these animals, but none dared to laugh now. Some demanded restrictions. Others whispered of treaties. A few suggested alliances, not out of respect, but out of terror. Tom listened, weighing each word, letting the silence stretch whenever the room turned to him. At last he rose, his voice measured but carrying across the chamber. He told them that Earth had no hidden armies, no great stockpiles of death badgers. He spoke of loyalty, of dogs and cats, of animals that symbolized compassion and partnership, the side of humanity that had been mocked and ridiculed. Then he gestured toward Noodles, gnawing unconcerned on his metal prize, and said this was the other side. A reminder that Earth also bred survival, stubbornness, and a refusal to yield. He told them the truth in words as simple as possible. Humanity carried both love and chaos, and the galaxy would be wise to remember that. The silence after his speech stretched long and heavy. For once no delegate dared to sneer. The Vorkan general, who had once collapsed in laughter at Daisy's sneeze, finally broke it. His voice was hoarse but clear. He proposed a treaty, one that recognized Earth as an equal member of the Council, not because of its fleets or technology, but because no one wished to provoke a planet capable of producing such a beast. The proposal met resistance at first, but the footage of Noodles tearing through ships and beasts alike loomed too large in every mind. In the end, fear won. The council signed a binding accord, elevating Earth to a position of unprecedented respect. Humanity had not fought a war, but it had gained recognition through a single act of chaos. As the ink dried on the treaty, Tom felt both relief and unease. He had achieved what he set out to do. Earth was safe, not because of diplomacy or armies, but because the galaxy now believed that humans commanded monsters. Yet he knew the truth. Noodles was not a soldier, not a weapon, not even trainable. He was simply himself. A force of nature that cared for nothing except his own impulses. The myth had grown far larger than the creature, and Tom wondered how long humanity could carry that legend without it consuming them. The galaxy moved quickly to rewrite the story. Scholars penned treatises about the indomitable will of Earth's fauna. Soldiers traded rumors about immortal badgers that drank radiation and laughed at plasma fire. On distant worlds, children whispered bedtime tales of tiny beasts that stood up to giants and won. Some spoke of fear, but more began to speak of awe. The honey badger had transcended reality, becoming a symbol that no amount of reason could erase. And humanity, for better or worse, now walked in its shadow. When Tom finally returned to his quarters, exhausted from endless debates and signatures, he found Noodles waiting. The badger had escaped his cage again, of course, and was curled comfortably on Tom's bunk, snoring softly with his paws splayed out. Tom sat beside him, staring at the scarred little body that had terrified an entire galaxy. He thought of Daisy, wagging her tail with pure love, and realized that Earth's strength was never just in one side or the other. It was in the combination, the harmony of compassion and defiance, gentleness and fury. Perhaps that was what truly set humanity apart. In the weeks that followed, Tom watched as Earth's position stabilized. Trade agreements were signed, alliances offered, old insults quietly erased from records. Delegates who once mocked him now bowed slightly when they passed, their eyes wary but no longer dismissive. Humanity had entered a new chapter in its history, one where it no longer begged for a seat at the table but held it firmly. And all because one badger had refused to bow. Still, Tom knew the galaxy had not seen the last of Noodles. Stories like his did not fade. They grew, they twisted, they became legends that echoed through time. Already there were reports of alien militias training with simulated badger encounters, entire academies studying the footage. The myth was alive and spreading, untouchable by fact. In some quiet way, Tom was glad. Perhaps a little fear would keep the galaxy honest. Perhaps it would remind them that even the smallest voice could roar. On his final day before departure, Tom packed his belongings and prepared for the journey home. He paused at the door, glancing back at the bed where Noodles sat licking his paws. The badger looked up, eyes glinting with the same indifference that had unsettled so many. Then, as if to punctuate the entire saga, he waddled over to Tom's desk, leapt onto the chair, and stole his sandwich without hesitation. Tom burst out laughing, the tension finally breaking. The galaxy might see him as a nightmare, a monster, a symbol of chaos. But to Tom, he would always be the most ridiculous, unstoppable creature he had ever met. As the ship carried them back to Earth, Tom gazed out into the stars, reflecting on what had been gained and what had been risked. The galaxy no longer mocked humanity. They respected it, feared it, and maybe even envied it. And all of it had begun with laughter at a sneezing dog, and ended with the legend of the honey badger. Tom closed his eyes, feeling the hum of the engines, and allowed himself a rare moment of peace. Whatever the future held, humanity had carved its place among the stars, carried there on the stubborn, snarling shoulders of a creature that simply did not care. Back on Earth, the story was already spreading. Children imitated the badger's growl in playgrounds, teachers told lessons of courage with his name, and headlines spoke of the immortal beast who had humbled empires. And somewhere in the heart of it all, one small honey badger gnawed happily on whatever he pleased, unaware that he had changed the fate of a world.